Good morning, everyone. It's Miss Amy from Camden Public Library, and today we are going to be playing with some watercolor techniques, and I'm super excited because I love doing this, and I just did it the other day with my Creative Art Afternoon kids, and they absolutely loved it. Here's what you're going to need. Get some watercolor paper, some salt, a plastic bag or saran wrap, a straw, some brushes of different sizes, obviously some water, a black marker, a crayon, some masking tape or washi tape, and of course some watercolors. You can use any watercolors. We used just cheap Crayola watercolors the other day and it worked great. Oh, and you're going to need just a little bit of rubbing alcohol. So first thing we're going to do is draw our blocks. This is a regular just piece of paper, and I'm going to draw 12 blocks and leave a little bit of space so that I can label them. They don't have to be any particular size, just draw your blocks. The first one I'm going to do is going to be over here so that it can dry. And we're going to do splatter. So I'm going to go ahead and get my brush wet, and then I'm going to take another brush and I'm just going to tap it. I want you to be able to see. And make sure your brush is wet enough. And I'm going to choose another color and I'm going to get it nice and wet. And then I'm going to tap it. And you can see it creates a really nice look. Let's do one more color just for the heck of it. I'm going to do a little yellow. Oh yeah, and this one is much lighter. And we'll go back and rub them after. So let's label it splatter. And we'll let that dry. Now we're going to move on to this one, and we're going to do a wet on wet wash. I'm going to take a larger brush, get it wet. I'm going to wet the entire block. Like this, just wet the entire block. Really nice and wet. And then I'm going to drop in some colors. And you can see it move because it is a very wet brush on a very wet surface. So it moves. And this is just, this is cold press, inexpensive paper. And it just is so beautiful. I love it. Okay, so now we're just going to let that dry, and we're going to do wet on wet. Wet on wet. Next, I'm going to get this one all wet because we're going to use the kosher salt right here. So I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to get it all wet. I'm going to use some green. I'm just going to get it in there. Just going to paint it. Okay. Nothing special, just paint the whole thing like that. And then what I'm gonna do is now I'm going to just put crystals of salt all over it, and it's going to do some pretty cool stuff to the wet watercolor. And I'm going to add just a little bit of color in here just to get a little bit more wet, like that. Label it kosher salt and let it dry. We're going to let that one dry. We're going to come over to this one. It doesn't matter what order you do it in. And I'm going to take some of the masking tape and I'm going to put some pieces on here. Just mask it off, literally. Doesn't matter where. Just put some pieces around. Get it down there. Oops. And like that. Oh, look at that. I got another piece right here. I'm just going to put that one there. Okay, so now that you have that masked off, now we're going to paint it. I'm just going to come in and I'm going to paint over the square like that. Get it all wet. The whole entire thing. And we'll let that one dry. Okay, and this one is masking. Now I'm going to do dry. So I'm just going to paint, get some paint, and I've got a really dry brush, and I'm just going to paint with that. And it's a very different look. There's a little water on the brush, but not really. It's a very, very dry brush, and I just kind of let it go. And that creates another look. And I want you to see this. So there you go. That is dry. Dry brush. Now we're going to move over to the next one. I'm going to get it all wet like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a gradient. So I'm going to get my brush, very wet, and I'm going to go along the bottom. I'm going to dip it. Then I'm going to go along, dip it, go along, dip it, go along, dip it, go along, and you can see that each time there is less pigment in your brush, but there still is pigment. So it's a gradient of blue from dark to light as we go from the bottom to the top. And now we're going to let that dry. So that is a gradient. It's gradient shades of dark blue to light blue. And it's the same brush. Moving on to the next one, I'm going to take a white crayon. And I'm going to draw. I'm just going to draw some leaves. And you'll see in a minute, because I cannot see, which is actually kind of cool, that you don't know until you see it. So now I have done that, but you can't tell. And I'm going to take some green and I'm just going to go over it. Oh, and look at that. And some of them may look a little wonky. And that's okay. And there we go. So there is what it looks like when we have a crayon that kind of masks off what we're doing. So I'm going to do crayon. So this one way up in the corner, we're going to use a straw. So I'm going to put that. Now, I've got a nice wet brush, and I'm going to dip it into my colors. And I'm going to dip it back into the water, and I'm going to just put a couple of drops on here. Okay, that's a pretty substantial drop of color. I'm just going to put a few. Okay, and now I'm going to take a straw. Okay, I've got my straw, and I'm going to blow with the straw. If you don't have a straw, you can also use, or if you don't want to use your own breath, you can use anything that will create a burst of air. Those ear suction things, which I can't think of why. It's like a bulb that you used with kids when they were little to get water out of their ear or whatever. But you can do that, and you can see. Look at this. I love the effect of the straw. Let's try the rubbing alcohol next. So I'm gonna label it now. Rubbing alcohol. I'm going to get my brush nice and wet. I'm going to paint my block. This is just a wet brush paint. Ooh, look at that. It picked up the red because there was a little bit of color. little bit of blending. Okay, then what I'm gonna do is I've got this rubbing alcohol and I have it in a little thing. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to touch it and you can see it move the paint. Really, really cool. It'll evaporate, but it's gonna do some cool stuff with the paint when it's wet. All right, so we're gonna let that one dry. Now we're gonna do a blend. So we're gonna blend two colors, a blending. I'm gonna do a wet wash over the whole thing. And I'm gonna use two colors. So I'm gonna use yellow, which I gotta get this clean here. There's some nice yellow. And I'm gonna do the yellow on the bottom. Nice and yellowy. Okay. Then I'm going to do blue on the top. I'm going to move this down like this. And then I'm going to go at the yellow. And when they touch, what's going to happen? I'm gonna let it, I'm gonna now put water in the middle and just bring those colors together. And they are going to blend to make green. Very cool. I'm gonna do one more. I'm going to do a, let's see, I want some purple because I like purple. And I'm gonna do just a wet on the dry paper. Very pretty. And it kind of smooths it out. I can get right in there and cover the whole thing with nothing left. I can usually do it pretty smoothly across. All right, there's a wet on dry. Let's label that wet on dry. Let's take the masking off and look at that. Get a nice crisp edge. You can do it with masking fluid is another way, but that's for more details. But even just this is really cool, and you could go in and do all kinds of fun painting there. I love that. So the masking is really cool. Let's check out what this plastic bag did. So here's the plastic bag, and I had it taped down, and look, it just creates some neat effects where the plastic bag was scrunched and was drying. The blend, you know, so this really blended a lot, moved. If I had had my paint down, it would have helped it. So there you are. A whole bunch of different techniques. Oh, let's do the, let's remove the salt. So I'm gonna pick this up. I'm just gonna scrape that salt off. And the longer you let it dry, the better. But you can see it really does some funky stuff to the paper and to the watercolor. So try these at home. Thanks for playing along with me. Do this with kids. Do this yourself. It's just really, really fun. Try some new techniques. Happy day, Miss Amy.